Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Selah and the Spades. So what Selah and the Spades is essentially about is basically we center on the Hardwell boarding school where there are like 5 factions going on, and basically the person that is on top of it all is this girl Selah. She is this senior who is getting ready to graduate, and she has been in the most prominent and the most powerful of the 5 factions known as the Spades for basically as long as she can remember. But she's getting ready to graduate, as I said, and she's looking for a new successor. And so she comes across this underclassman named Paloma, who she is immediately taken aback by, decides to take her under her wing, and hopes to make this girl her successor, but also starts to realize that that process is going to be a lot more complicated than she really thought it was going to be. So Selah and the Spades overall, I really didn't know too much about this going into it. I watched the trailer and things like that, and I wasn't really all that impressed by it. It looked like a movie that wasn't really going to be anything that special. I didn't really see much hope in this film. There definitely was potential in it for sure, but it just wasn't anything that I was that excited for. It's really just, Amazon had a new movie coming out. I'm trying to review you guys as many new releases as I possibly can, during this crazy time right now. And this definitely seemed like one of those films that would do pretty well with that. And for all I know, this could be a really good indie release. Amazon usually delivers, not always, Goldfinch and Life Itself, but, most of the time they very much do deliver. Unfortunately, though, this is not one of those cases. This is a very run-of-the-mill and very mediocre film that I think could have been so much more overall. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I'll say this right now, the one thing that really does hold this film together and keeps it from being completely just boring and unwatchable is the cast here. I think everyone, for the most part, does do a really good job, particularly Lovie Simon as our main character, Selah. I was very impressed by her. You definitely feel her passion throughout this movie. Selah is someone who really cares about this. It means a lot to her, and you really do feel her sort of conflicted throughout this movie, because on one hand she wants to take Paloma under her wing, but on the other hand she doesn't know if she wants to get her so involved in what's going on and things like that. And so I thought overall she definitely did do a really good job. Even when her character wasn't the strongest, which I'll get into, I thought she still was a pretty big highlight here. I really haven't seen her in too much at all, but she really did shine, particularly in that one scene that everyone's going to be talking about with her and these cheerleaders, and she gives this spoken poetry of sorts. Very much sort of felt, definitely, I think, showcases her talents pretty well, and she was definitely just, I think, the best thing about this movie. I was very impressed by her in this film. I thought she did a really good job. Same goes with Celeste O'Connor, another actress that I really haven't seen much of before, but I was very impressed by her as Paloma, who, she really feels like, out of all the characters, I would say, she kind of feels like the audience in that way, where she's very naive and doesn't really understand what she's getting herself into, and I think she definitely does do a really good job with that. And then, of course, there's Jerome, who, coming off the heels of his work and When They See Us, I expect a lot from him. This is not on that level, but he's still really damn good in this movie. You really feel his very complicated relationship with Selah. These two have been friends for a very long time, and you really do feel them doing everything they can to try to make this plan, work out and things like that. And I just thought the chemistry between these three were really great. They really do a good job, I think, of anchoring this movie. They're the thing that keeps you at least somewhat invested, and I was impressed by the 3 main performances here. Unfortunately, the rest of the performance in this movie, I just didn't feel there was much to them. Jesse Williams is pretty much wasted here. His entire role just consists of him either yelling or just reprimanding his students. There really isn't much for him to do here at all. Same with Gina Torres, who plays Selah's mother. She really only has one scene in the movie, and it's not a memorable scene at all, unfortunately. I did not think that she was really all that well utilized. The supporting cast, I mean, there's some good ones in there, like Benjamin Brillat and Ray Bell, I didn't think were too bad. But the one performance that just did not work out for me at all here was Anna Mulvoy 10 as the character of Bobby, who runs one of the factions. I thought was terrible here. I could not stand her in this movie. And it's weird because all the other actors here, I feel like, are giving pretty grounded and realistic performances. Any time that she was trying to call out Selah or act somewhat bitchy, it was just not believable at all. I was not at all for what she was doing. Every scene with her was so cringy and honestly really hard to watch, and I was just not buying her in this role at all. Aside from her, though, the acting is really not too bad and probably the best thing about this movie. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which... oh, this is where we get to the things that really do, unfortunately, bring this movie down. The directing especially, I think, is a big issue because Tayarisha Poe, I get it. This is her first movie. It very much does show. She's still clearly trying to find her style. My issue, though, is that I think she's a little too focused on the style here. This feels like one of those films that thinks it's a lot deeper than it is. And again, it's pretty easy to tell that this is someone that is very young and that she is, you know, coming out of like college and things like that. And I think she can get there eventually. I think this is a director that has a lot of potential. I just feel like at this point, she needs to figure out what she really wants to do because I feel like her style is just not working in this movie. And the biggest thing I think it does wrong is that it takes itself way too seriously. This is a film that almost at points resembles the plot of like Mean Girls or something like that, and it's a straight up drama throughout. There's hardly any comedy in this whatsoever, and I actually do feel it brings it down. I'm not saying that like every teen film has to be funny. I mean, hell, the best teen show out there right now is one of the most serious depictions of adolescence I've ever seen in Euphoria. But this is just not a film that I really do feel needed to be as serious as it was. It almost kind of felt like, it almost kind of felt silly because it reminds you, you know, when you're in high school and things like that, just how trivial some of these things can be. And I don't know if that's what Poe was trying to go for, but it was just not really jiving with me at all. I did not really feel the tone in this movie. I felt like it should be a lot more fun than it was. And because it's so deathly serious, it very frequently took me out of the film. And I just don't think she did a very good job here. Again, her style, I definitely did feel. She wants this to be very different. She wants it to be very out there and things like that, and I appreciate that, but I just did not feel there was as much substance and as much of a vision as there really should have been. It very much does feel like a first film, unfortunately, and I hate saying that because, again, I love supporting, you know, indie directors like this, but I just... Poe at this point has not really proven to me why she's a director worth watching, and that's unfortunate to say. The writing as well, I really do feel leaves a lot to be desired. Her writing is just really not good in this film, and there's a lot of problems with it. I'd say its biggest issue really is just the plot in general. You know, the plot of the movie is supposed to be Selah taking this girl under her wing and trying to do what she can to make her be her successor, and that could be a really interesting plot line. The problem is everything in this movie going on story-wise feels incredibly half-baked and underwritten, and I really do attest that to the fact that I don't think this really works as a movie. I think if this was a TV series, I think there's a lot more you could get out of this. The 5 factions, for example, we really don't get to know them at all, aside from just Selah arguing with them about things and them being annoyed with what she's doing and realizing that they treat these factions as almost a gang life, basically. Like, they get into this very heavy and brutal fights throughout it. There's very much a power dynamic going on between all 5 of the factions, but you never really feel it because we don't really get a look at any of them. They don't really do a good job of fully fleshing them out. It really is just the Spades that feels fleshed out, and I feel like that's the biggest problem with this movie, is you could almost just remove the factions entirely, and I feel like the film would honestly not be all that different, aside aside from a random scene of, say, Jerome's character getting hurt, or Paloma getting hurt. I feel like if you would have cut them from the film, it actually might have been a little bit better, and I think that definitely does bring it down. But I think that's another big problem with this movie, is the idea of show not tell. There's so many things that we don't even see. It feels like the movie is trying to be really tame, which is weird because the movie, to my knowledge, is rated R, and it almost feels like it could be PG-13. Especially the scenes that involve the factions, attacking each other. We don't see any of it. It's just not very interesting to watch because you don't actually get to see what led to this, what instigated this, when did this happen, what did these characters do to let something like this occur. It was an interesting idea, but I feel like it was a real disservice to the film, but I also feel like the characters just aren't that great here. Selah, especially as a lead character, I just feel is very messily written. She starts out the film, and it seems like we can tell where she wants to go. She wants to she wants to take Paloma under her wing because she admires her, because Paloma is someone that likes to hang out with, the cool crowd and things like that. She's a lot quieter and meek, and kind of reminds Selah of who she could be. And, I was perfectly fine with that. The relationship that develops between the two, I actually was kind of getting invested in at first. You see how Paloma is someone that really starts to get more ingrained with this lifestyle, something that she really doesn't understand what she's fully getting herself into, but she's intrigued because she wants to hang out with someone like Selah, who's much more popular and in a much better situation. She's in a much better place socially and financially and things like that, and Paloma's just not really there. And so I thought that was interesting, but then there comes a point where they kind of make you think Selah doesn't even really want this. She doesn't really care that much about it. She kind of says something to the effect of not really caring, and so you're just kind of wondering, okay, if you don't really care, then why am I watching a whole movie of you trying to recruit this girl? Why does this really matter to you? They also bring up very early on how she's asexual, and they do absolutely nothing with this. It almost feels like they just did that so they could make Selah feel like a more developed character than she was, and it's really not well done. I don't want to say it's queer baiting because I don't think that counts as queer baiting, but it almost feels that way. It almost feels like there's this forced sexuality in here really for no reason at all, and I don't really understand what the point of that was. I thought they maybe could have dived into that a little bit more, maybe show the contrast between Paloma and Selah, but they don't really do a good job with that. There's a scene with Selah and her mom, and it making it seem like maybe she's not as happy with how she's turned out, but just in general, it's very hard to read this character. There are points where you think you know her, and then there'll be some sort of reveal or some sort of information that just contradicts with what they're setting up. It's not the kind of information that feels like this is something they've been building to, or that it makes this character more complex. No, it almost feels like they just didn't know what to do with this character, and I feel like that really does bring it down. Is another thing that I feel like could have been better examined in a TV show. I just don't think they had enough time here to really tell her story fully. Same with Paloma. We get the sense that Paloma doesn't come from the greatest background family-wise, and we don't really get to see much of that at all. We really only get one scene of that, and that was definitely disappointing. Or the character of Maxie, Jerome's character, I felt was also super underwritten. He's someone who's a bit more conflicted. You can tell that he likes some of the people in the other factions, and so you can see him maybe starting to turn away from Selah, but again, all of these plot lines just feel very underwritten. They don't feel like they're fully fleshed out, so when things occur, it just feels like you're just kind of like, oh, okay. You don't really have much of a reaction to it. You're just kind of fine with what's happening, and I feel like that's the movie's biggest problem, is that there just isn't enough story, there isn't enough time to develop anything that's going on here, and it leads to a third act that is very unsatisfying. The way the third act goes, especially, I thought was honestly kind of infuriating. It ends in a very unsatisfying manner and really just left me questioning, what is this movie really trying to say? What is the deeper meaning here? Because I know there's something. I know that there is something that Tayarisha Poe is trying to tell me here. I know there is something that she wants to say, but I just cannot for the life of me figure it out. I feel like there were themes of this movie about basically trying to separate your high school self from who you're going to become, and kind of, the idea that maybe you're moving away from this, or you're disinterested, or putting on a facade that you're really not. But again, these are themes that just aren't very well fleshed out at all, and it makes it very hard to stay invested in this movie. And again, it's unfortunate because I do think there are some generally good ideas here. I like the idea, like I said, that Selah is asexual, that she isn't this overly sexualized teen, that she's someone who, is so in control of things that she feels like she has all this power. She feels like she can tell everyone what to do. She doesn't feel like she has to worry about other things that other teenage girls have to deal with. But again, these just aren't very well fleshed out ideas, and I feel like that's what really does bring this movie down overall. The cinematography here is fine. There's definitely some really well shot scenes, particularly in the third act. I thought was definitely very effective. The score here is fine, not really much to say about it overall, and the editing. Again, I just think this movie is way too short. It's only 90 minutes long, and I do not think that's the right amount of time for this film. If it was 2 hours, I feel like they could have fleshed out a lot of these concepts more. But like I said, I also really do feel that at the end of the day, this is a film that just should not be one. I really do feel this would work a lot better as a TV show. And unsurprisingly, I did read that Amazon is thinking about turning this into a TV show if this film is successful. And I don't know if it is. I don't know if anyone's really watching this film. I really haven't heard too many people bring it up. But I hope that they do, because I really do feel that there's a lot of good ideas here that could be way more fleshed out in a television series rather than a 90-minute movie where you just have to move quickly because, of the limited amount of time you have. Whereas TV, you can spend as much time as you want on things. Develop the Paloma and Selah friendship more. Go into more of the factions, the differences between them, why they're at each other's throats so much. Go into how Selah really feels about this. Does she actually care about this, or is she putting on a facade? Does she really care about Paloma? Go into maybe her asexuality more. There's so many things, go into her home life more, and then contrast that with Paloma's more rough, hard life. I mean, there's so many things that they could have dived into, and they just chose not to, and that's what really does bring this film down for me. Unfortunately, what we have is a film that just feels very derivative, very lazy, very schlocky as well, and at points, honestly, very cheesy and hard to watch. It's bogged down by taking itself way too seriously. It feels like it's way more important than it is. Some of it comes across as really silly, especially in the third act for sure. It does have some really solid performances from its three leads, but unfortunately that isn't enough to hold this film together overall. Unfortunately, this is a film that I really don't see myself remembering. It's a film that I feel like had a lot of potential, but really just lost sight of what I think really could have made it out to be a much better film than it really did end up being. I do think, like I said, it has potential to be a good TV series in the future, and I do hope that they do that because I feel like there's a lot more you could dive into overall. But as it is, this film really did not do much of anything for me, so I am going to give Selah and the Spades overall a C. But over, guys, to my review of Selah and the Spades. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie, all the true thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.